Okay, so you want to own a gladiator school. Sand baking in the sun. A roaring crowd. A champion raising his sword while the whole arena chants his name. Here's the part the romantic version leaves out. In 73 BC, about 70 gladiators fight their way out of a school in Capua. A lanista named Lentulus Batiatus runs it. They have nothing but kitchen knives. Spartacus takes command. That escape becomes a war. It takes Rome 2 years and multiple armies to put it down. The death was never the point. The price was, let's kill the 2 men enter 1 man leaves. Myth first. No, wait, that's not even an ancient saying. That's a line from a movie from 1985. Let's kill the actual myth instead. The myth says a fight in the arena almost always ends in a corpse. It doesn't. Modern historians have gone through gladiator tombstones, win-loss graffiti, and match records from Pompeii. The French scholar Georges Ville is among the first of them. The real death rate comes out somewhere around 10 to 20% of fights in this period. Not every fight. 1 in 5 to 1 in 10. One surviving set of painted fight results comes from Pompeii. It lists 10 pairs of gladiators for a single day's program. 1 death. That's the actual scoreboard, not the Hollywood one. Some of the fighters on that same wall have already recorded a dozen fights. Sometimes more. They're still walking around to fight again. Historians examining surviving tombstones have found gladiators with genuinely absurd records. And this is supposed to be a suicidal job. One survives an estimated 150 separate bouts. Another dies at 90 years old. That's decades after anyone could have made him fight again. Those aren't typical. They're outliers. But they couldn't exist at all. Not if this were a business built on grinding men through the sand once and burying them. Historians don't even agree on how long a typical career lasts. Ville puts the average age at death around 27. That's roughly the same as any other Roman man. Another scholar, Junkelmann, argues that number is skewed. It depends on which gladiators could even afford a tombstone in the first place. The real average, he says, is younger. So why does a defeated gladiator usually walk away? Because he's not a stray dog. He's capital. A trained fighter takes months, sometimes years to build. And he doesn't come in one size. The doctories, the specialist trainers, don't teach one style. Put a murmillo in the sand, heavily armored, a big shield, a short sword, built to grind an opponent down through sheer attrition. Now take that exact training and throw it away. A retiree is fights with almost nothing, a net, a trident, speed instead of armor. Different instructor entirely. The skills don't overlap even slightly. Then there's the thraex, a small curved blade, a specific approved list of opponents he's allowed to fight. The pairing itself is part of the show. 3 men. 3 completely different jobs. Building any one of them in any one of these specialities is a genuine capital investment, not a disposable extra. Picture the training floor for a second, not the arena. Wooden swords, blunted edges. A doctor of arms walks the line, correcting footwork, the way a fencing coach does today. The real blade only comes out for the paying customers. The moment he's lying in the sand with a blade at his throat, the crowd doesn't actually decide his fate. Somebody in the stands is already doing the maths. So what does it actually cost to stock a school like this? For once, this channel gets to hand you a real government price list, instead of shrugging and saying the records didn't survive. In 177 AD, the Emperor Marcus Aurelius and his son Commodus Act got the Senate to pass an actual law. It caps what a lanista can charge for gladiators. It was called the Senatus Consultum de Pretius Gladiatorum Minuendis. That's a very long Latin way of saying stop overcharging for murder. The law survives on an inscription, badly damaged in places. But the remaining numbers were specific. So what's the damage? Tier by tier. At the cheap end, a small commercial show costs at most 30,000 sesterces total. That's about $60,000 in today's money. From there, the law scales your budget up in bands. 30,000, 60,000, 100,000, 150,000. Every band unlocks a slightly better class of fighter. But here's the number that actually matters. Take even the most lavish, most expensive show the law allows. There's still a hard ceiling. 15,000 sesterces, $100,000 today. The inscription itself still uses the phrase pretium set, the price shall be. It reads like a judge handing down a sentence, not a merchant setting a price. That's the absolute maximum any gladiator can legally cost. No matter how rich you are, no matter how badly you want to impress the crowd, We don't have a clean wage figure from this exact document, so I can't convert that into modern money the way this channel usually does. I'm not going to invent one. What we do have is the ratio, and it's a brutal one. 600 sesterces, or about $1,200 for a condemned criminal, guaranteed to die. $15,000 or about $30,000 for a trained professional the law is actively trying to keep alive. That's 25 times the price for the version of this business that isn't supposed to end in a corpse. And here's the detail that explains the whole industry. The same law forces every classed show to fill at least half its roster with cheap herd fighters. They're called gregarii, priced at 1,000 to 2,000 sesterces each. The state is legally requiring you to mostly hire the discount tier, save your star fighters and their price tags for the main event. There's an even stranger clause tucked into the same law, way out in the Gallic provinces. A special category of fighter, called the trinqui, is tied to older local ritual. It's capped at 2,000 sesterces apiece. An imperial official supplies condemned men to the lanistae directly. They're priced at 6 gold RI a head. That roughly matches the 600 sesterces execution rate from a moment ago. Even out on the edge of the empire, Rome is still running the same spreadsheet. And the law doesn't just cap prices, it renegotiates the whole relationship. In exchange for accepting these ceilings, lanistae get an existing tax on selling gladiators wiped out entirely. Lower prices, but no more tax collector taking a cut on top. The emperor isn't just capping a market here, he's actually redesigning it. You can't run a school on gladiators alone. So who's actually on the payroll? At the top, in the Old Republic, that's the lanista himself, the owner. By the time we reach the big imperial schools, the top of the org chart changes. Take the Ludus Magnus. It's built right next to the Colosseum under the Emperor Domitian, close enough that a private underground passage connects the two buildings directly. It isn't the only one out there either. The Colosseum district eventually has 4 separate state schools clustered around it. The Ludus Magnus for the main roster, the Ludus Matutinus, training the men who fight animals, the Ludus Gallicus and the Ludus Dasychus. Each one is named for a conquered people. Rome decides their fighting styles are worth their own dedicated training ground. An imperial procurator runs a school like that. The lanista, if there's still one at all, works for him instead of for himself. Archaeology gives us the floor plan. Rows of small cells wrap around a central courtyard. In the middle of that courtyard sits a miniature practice arena, its own tiny amphitheater with seating built right into the design. Someone, staff, or patrons, or the simply curious, is meant to watch the training happen. Multiple stories of service rooms and galleries rise around it. Storage, kitchens, quarters for the instructors, clerks keeping the roster straight, armorers maintaining the equipment, half barracks, half prison, built to a genuine architectural plan. Underneath the owner, the doctors run the training, one instructor per weapon type. And underneath them sits a name you might not expect in a building like this, a medicus. The physician Galen gets his start treating gladiators at a school in Pergamon. He goes on to become one of the most famous doctors in the ancient world. He later writes that the job teaches him more about wounds, about bones, about the inside of a living human body, more than almost anything else in his early career. This is the same man who eventually treats emperors. His entire surgical education starts on a gladiator's training wage. He learns trauma medicine on men his employer needs walking again by spring. You don't put your best surgeon on a disposable asset. You put him there because the man in front of him costs you 8,000 sesterces, and you'd like him walking again by next season. One more line item on the payroll. And it's a grim one. Guards. After Spartacus, schools started posting soldiers at the armory. Real weapons get issued in the morning and collected again at night. Counted out and counted back in, the same way a modern armory signs rifles in and out. Training happens with wood and blunted edges in between. Under guard the entire time. The lesson of Capua doesn't get forgotten. It gets budgeted for permanently in every school built afterwards. So, who actually becomes a gladiator, and where do they come from? 3 completely different pipelines feed into the same arena. And the romantic version blurs them into one. The first is slaves servi, bought on the open market or taken as prisoners of war, then trained up as an investment, the same way you'd buy and train a plow ox, except this one talks back. and occasionally wins you money. The second is stranger, free men, octorati, who volunteer. They sign up voluntarily for pay, sometimes to escape a debt they can't otherwise clear, sometimes chasing the fame a good record could bring. A famous name on that Pompeii wall draws its own crowd. It gets its own graffiti, scrawled by admirers, the ancient equivalent of a fighter with a following. For a free man with nothing else going for him, that's a real career, not just a desperate last resort. They swear an oath called the Sacramentum Gladiatorium. Picture the moment itself, a free man, standing upright saying the words out loud before witnesses. The most vivid version of that wording comes down to us through a novel, Petronius's Satyricon, a writer having some fun with just how extreme the real oath sounds. Uri, to be burned. Vincere, to be bound. Verberere, to be beaten. Pharaoh Koinakari, to be killed by the sword if the master orders it. 4 words, 4 promises, and a free man says all of them himself, out loud, before anyone hires him for a single fight. A free Roman citizen choosing that in writing for money. That's not a footnote. That's a real labor market, functioning right alongside the slave one, with its own contracts and its own price. Even Seneca reaches for it. Writing philosophy for the educated elite, he uses the gladiator's oath as his go-to image for total commitment. The willingness to accept a wound and keep standing. He isn't being poetic for its own sake. Everyone reading him already knows exactly what that oath costs the men who swear it. Signing it also means accepting infamia, a formal legal stain that follows a man for the rest of his life. An infamis can't hold public office. His word isn't accepted as testimony in most courts. A free citizen trades away pieces of his own citizenship in ink for a wage and a chance at fame. And the third pipeline isn't gladiators at all. Not really, whatever the posters outside might say. Damnati, criminals condemned to the arena, aren't professionals being trained to survive. Nobody spends a year training a damnatus. Nobody assigns him a doctor. Nobody bothers protecting an asset that is never meant to last past its first afternoon. Their death is the sentence itself, not a risk they're managing. Remember that 600 sesterces flat fee from the price list. That's not a bargain gladiator. That's a court paying a school owner to carry out an execution with better production values. Now, the revenue. Let's consider the weakest line first. The herd fighters, the gregarii, are the backbone of the everyday business. Cheap, plentiful. The ones filling out half of every classed roster by law. Above them, the mid-tier classed fighters, 5,000 to 8,000 sesterces depending on the size of the show. Above that, the primi ordinis, the headline names, the ones who can carry a whole afternoon on their own and justify a price tag up near the legal ceiling. And underneath all 3 tiers, quieter than any of them, is the mechanism. The thing that makes this whole industry work the way it does. It's the hire contract itself. When a lanista sends gladiators to fight at somebody else's games, that's a legal arrangement. It's called locatio conductio, a lease of services. It works almost exactly like renting out expensive equipment. The sponsor of the games, the editor, pays a day rate for the use of the gladiator. That's the cheap part. But say that gladiator dies, or gets crippled badly enough to end his career. The editor doesn't just lose a fighter for the afternoon, he owes the lanista something close to the man's full value, the whole investment gone in an instant. And billed accordingly. Picture the moment. A gladiator is down in the sand, weaponless, looking up at the man who's about to decide if he lives. He isn't thinking about mercy. Should I let this beaten man live? Isn't a moral question. It is a choice not being made by a random careless guess. Instead, it is based on careful thought and invoice a wealthy Roman is trying to avoid. Missio, mercy, the crowd's famous power to spare a defeated man. Mostly, it isn't mercy at all. It's the cheaper line item. The death was never the point. The price was. That's not just this video's closing line. That's the legal machinery running underneath the sand the entire time. So what can actually go wrong running one of these? Everything. And Rome has the receipts. Start with the one we already know. Go back to that kitchen in Capua. 200 men are in on the plan. Someone talks. By the time the alarm goes up, there's no time for a real weapon, so they grab what's actually in reach. Meat knives. Cooking spits, still hot from the fire. About 70 of them make it past the gate. On the road, they hit a wagon. It's loaded with proper gladiatorial weapons. The real steel they train with every day but never get to keep. They tear it open and arm themselves, for the first time as the men they've actually been trained to be. That's the moment this stops being an escape and starts being an army. Two separate ancient historians, Plutarch and Appian, both write the story, not long after it happens. They see it through the same lens, even though the small details differ. 70 men become a slave army. They beat multiple Roman armies. It's finally crushed 2 years later in 71 BC. Not a bad quarter. The single worst-case scenario in the entire history of the business. And it happened once. It changed how every school was run afterwards. Then there's the ordinary kind of disaster, the kind that doesn't need an uprising at all. In 59 AD, a gladiatorial show at Pompeii turns into a riot between the locals and visitors from the nearby town of Nuceria. Tacitus says it starts with nothing more than insults shouted across the stands, the kind of trash talk every local derby has ever produced. It doesn't stay words for long. Stones fly, then blades, and people on both sides end up dead. Tacitus writes it up as a genuine scandal, and Rome's response is blunt. Pompey loses the right to hold gladiatorial games at all for 10 full years. The local associations blamed for organizing the trouble get dissolved along with the ban. Imagine building your entire local entertainment economy around these shows. Then imagine the government simply switching it off for a decade, because a crowd couldn't behave itself. And sometimes the danger isn't the fighters or the crowd, it's the building. In 27 AD, a freedman named Attilius throws up a cheap wooden amphitheater at Fidenae. He cuts corners to save money. It collapses under the weight of the crowd during a show. Tacitus doesn't give us a clean death toll. Neither will I. The honest answer is, we don't have a reliable number. Just ancient accounts describing a catastrophe on a huge scale. 3 completely different ways to lose everything. A revolt, a riot, and a building that is never safe to fill in the first place. None of them shows up as a line item in anyone's budget until the exact year they do. And the ground itself shifts under this business over time, not just in a single bad afternoon. That 10 to 20% death rate we opened with is a 1st and 2nd century number. By the 3rd century, emperors competed to put on even bloodier spectacles. Missio gets granted less and less. Some of the same historians who counted those Pompeii tombstones estimate the odds climbing toward 1 in 2. The whole economic logic of this chapter, trained men kept alive because dead men cost more, slowly stops holding. The emperors themselves began to prefer the corpses. So what does a year look like running one of these schools? We can build this one with real numbers for once, straight from that price law. A good year is fully booked. Mostly herd fighters at 1,000 or 2,000 sesterces a booking. A couple of your classed fighters out at 5,000 or 6,000 each, and nobody dies. Every fee collected is close to pure margin against what you've already spent training them. An average year looks similar, except Missio doesn't always land in your favor. Every so often, a fighter comes home from someone else's games, too injured to work again. You eat months of lost bookings while he heals, if he heals at all. Neither of those years, good or average, is the one that keeps a lanista awake at night. A bad year is the one line item everyone in this industry actually fears. One of your primi ordinus fighters, your best earner, the one you've been renting out at 12 or 15,000 sesterces a show, dies in somebody else's arena. The indemnity you're owed doesn't cover what he's worth to you long term. The years of future bookings, the reputation, the training you can't get back. You've just lost your best asset and your best future income in the same afternoon, and the payout barely covers the replacement. Multiply that by an actual riot closing your local market for 10 years, or a war breaking out because your own stock walked out the front gate. Then you can see why this business runs on managing risk, not on selling violence. None of that shows up if you only ever look at the ticket prices in the roaring crowd. It only shows up in the ledger, which is exactly where this channel has been looking the whole time. So who actually got rich off all this? Here's an honest gap before I answer that. We don't have a clean rags to riches story for an individual lanista. No named school owner with a documented fortune, and no named one who ends up bankrupt either. The record just doesn't give us that receipt, not the way it does for a blacksmith's estate or a tavern keeper's will. What the record does give us is bigger than any single lanista, and it's a name you already know. Julius Caesar keeps an unusually large private gladiator troupe, so large it genuinely frightens his political enemies. Suetonius writes it down plainly. Caesar assembles gladiators from all over. He terrifies his rivals with the sheer size of the company. The Senate responds. It passes an actual law, capping how many gladiators any one citizen is allowed to keep in Rome. Read that again. The government of Rome writes a law specifically because one private citizen owns too many gladiators. Caesar isn't running a hire business chasing sesterces per bout. He's not selling fights to editors for a fee. He's using raw numbers. Hundreds of trained fighters under his personal control. A visible, terrifying flex of private power. Every ordinary lanista in this story is stuck holding infamia, legally and socially beneath contempt, no matter how much money he makes. Caesar is the one person who works it out. The main point is that the huge size and fame of the event, not the fighter's pay, is what truly builds power and money. He doesn't get rich from gladiators, he gets Rome. So could you actually get rich owning a Roman gladiator school? It depends entirely on what you mean by rich. And who you're asking, the lanista, the octorotus, or the man watching from the imperial box. As a working lanista, chasing higher fees against a price list capped by the emperor himself. Yes, plausibly, steadily. The way the industry clearly sustains itself for centuries. As a man hoping money buys you respect? No, not even slightly. The law calls you infames on your best day and your worst one. As Caesar, using the sheer size of your private army as a lever against the entire Roman state, that's not owning a gladiator school anymore. That's owning Rome, with gladiators as the receipt. Every lanista who ever runs a school is a name on a price list, if he's remembered at all. Caesar is the one man who reads that same list and sees something else entirely. Not fighters for hire, leverage. The death was never the point, the price was.